The heart monitor flatlined, and Dr. Penhaligon froze. He was the best trauma surgeon at Memorial West, but staring at a soldier's chest torn open by jagged shrapnel, he was completely out of his depth. That's when the quiet, mocked temporary nurse shoved him aside. "Move, doctor. I've got this." Memorial West Hospital in Colorado Springs prided itself on being a premier Level 2 trauma center, a gleaming beacon of modern medicine where the doctors wore their egos as prominently as their pristine white coats. The emergency department was a heavily fortified hierarchy, a delicate ecosystem of tenured attending physicians, ambitious residents, and a cliquish nursing staff ruled by the iron fist of head nurse Brenda Carmichael. Into this hostile environment stepped Sarah Jenkins. Sarah did not look like a threat to the established order. At 32, she was soft-spoken, with tired hazel eyes, hair tied back in a messy practical bun, and scrubs that always seemed a half-size too large. She was an agency temp, a hired gun brought in to cover a 3-month staffing shortage. In the high-stakes, high-gossip world of Memorial West's ER, being a temp was akin to being a ghost. You were expected to do the grunt work, cover the less desirable shifts, and above all, stay out of the way of the real medical professionals. Jenkins. Brenda's voice sliced through the low hum of the nurse's station on a dreary Tuesday evening. Brenda was a woman who communicated entirely in sighs and sharp glances. "Bed 4 needs a catheter, and the drunk in bed 7 threw up on his shoes again. Handle it, and try not to mix up the charts this time." Sarah didn't flinch. She simply nodded, picked up her clipboard, and walked toward the supply closet. She was used to Brenda's microaggressions. For the past 6 weeks, Sarah had been the punching bag for the department. The permanent staff laughed at her behind her back, mocking her quiet demeanor and her insistence on triple-checking every dosage. They called her Turtle because she moved with a methodical, unhurried precision that they mistook for sluggishness. "I don't know where the agency finds them," muttered Dr. Arthur Penhaligon, Memorial's star trauma surgeon, as he watched Sarah walk away. Penhaligon was brilliant, handsome, and fiercely arrogant. He treated the ER like his personal theater, and he expected his supporting cast to worship the ground he walked on. "She has the reflexes of a sedated sloth. If we get a real trauma in here, she's going to freeze." "She's just a temp, Arthur," Brenda replied loud enough for the words to carry down the hallway. "She'll be gone in 6 weeks. We just have to survive her until then." Sarah heard them. She always did, but she let the words wash over her, focusing instead on the faint, faded scar that traced the line of her collarbone, a quiet reminder of a life she had left behind. Later that evening, the automatic doors of the ambulance bay slid open, and the paramedics wheeled in a 22-year-old male. He had been T-boned at an intersection by a delivery truck. The ER sprang into its choreographed routine. Dr. Penhaligon took his place at the head of the bed, barking orders at Tyler Reed, a nervous first-year resident. "Blunt force trauma to the chest, hypotensive tachycardic," the paramedic reported out of breath. "GCS is 13, but he's dropping. All right, let's get a chest tube in. He's probably got a hemothorax." Penhaligon ordered smoothly, holding his hand out for a scalpel. Reed prepped the right side. Sarah, who had been assigned to chart the trauma, stood quietly in the corner. Her eyes flicked from the monitor to the patient's neck. She noticed the slight, almost imperceptible deviation of the trachea to the left. She looked at the monitor again. The patient's oxygen saturation was plummeting down to 84%, and his heart rate spiked to 140. Penhaligon was focused on the right side of the chest, convinced of his initial diagnosis. Tyler Reed was fumbling with the sterile drape. "Doctor," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "Tracheal deviation to the left. No breath sounds on the right. It's a tension pneumothorax. He needs a needle decompression before you place the tube or he's going to code." Penhaligon stopped, his scalpel hovering in the air. He turned his head, slowly glaring at Sarah, as if she had just insulted his mother. The entire trauma bay went dead silent. A temp nurse did not correct an attending surgeon. It was an unspoken, unbreakable law of Memorial West. "Excuse me, Jenkins." Penhaligon's voice dripped with condescension. "Did you suddenly acquire an MD while I wasn't looking?" "With respect, doctor, his pressure is dropping rapidly. If you don't decompress—" "I know what I'm looking at." Penhaligon snapped, his face flushing red. "He has fluid in the cavity, not trapped air. Now step back, shut your mouth, and let the real doctors work. You are just a temp. Do not ever interrupt my trauma room again." Sarah held his gaze for a fraction of a second. She didn't back down, but she took a half step back, folding her arms. "Understood, doctor." 10 seconds later, the monitors began to scream. The patient's heart rate plummeted. "He's bradycardic." Tyler Reed panicked, his hands shaking. "Pressure is 60 over palpable." Penhaligon's confident facade cracked. He looked at the neck. The trachea had shifted further. Sarah had been right. It was a textbook tension pneumothorax. The trapped air was crushing the patient's heart. "Damn it!" Penhaligon hissed, his pride swallowing hard. "Reed, get me a 14-gauge needle. Fast." The resident fumbled, dropping a package on the floor in his haste, before finally handing over the needle. Penhaligon jammed it into the patient's second intercostal space. A loud hiss of escaping air echoed in the room, and almost instantly the monitors stabilized. The patient's color began to return. Penhaligon stood there, chest heaving, refusing to look in Sarah's direction. "Lucky guess, Jenkins," Brenda whispered venomously as they cleaned up the bay afterward. "Don't think this makes you special. You undermined an attending in front of the staff. You're lucky he doesn't have your contract terminated tonight." Sarah just wiped down the stainless steel mayo stand. She didn't care about their bruised egos. She cared that the patient was alive. She disposed of the bloody gloves, washed her hands, and went back to the supply closet. She was used to being underestimated. After what she had seen in her life, the petty squabbles of a civilian emergency room were nothing more than background noise. The Friday night shift began like any other, characterized by the typical influx of twisted ankles, minor lacerations, and the inevitable rowdy teenagers from the local high school football game. By 11 p.m., a torrential downpour had enveloped Colorado Springs, turning the sky pitch black and lashing rain against the thick glass windows of the hospital lobby. Sarah was stationed in Trauma Bay, restocking the intubation kits. Dr. Penhaligon was at the central nursing station, loudly recounting a golfing victory to a captive audience of residents, while Brenda sat at the main terminal, aggressively clicking her mouse and sipping lukewarm coffee. Then the red emergency dispatch phone rang. It wasn't the standard ring. It was the shrill, piercing klaxon reserved for mass casualties or incoming flights. Brenda picked it up, her expression shifting from irritation to profound confusion. "Memorial West ER," she said. She paused. "Wait, what? Repeat that. You're coming here? Why not the base hospital? We aren't... Wait, how many..." Brenda slammed the phone down, her face entirely drained of color. "What is it?" Penhaligon asked, his smile vanishing. "That was..." That was Fort Carson Dispatch. Brenda stammered, her voice trembling. There's been a catastrophic incident during a night ops live fire training exercise up in the foothills. 2 transport vehicles collided and rolled down a ravine into an ordnance zone. Evans Army Hospital is fully backed up with a power grid failure from the storm. They have an airborne medevac inbound, coming to our helipad. Penhaligon stiffened. How many casualties? 6, Brenda said, swallowing hard. 2 critical. They said they have a Category A blast injury. ETA is 2 minutes. 2 minutes, Penhaligon shouted. We don't have the blood bank prepped for that. Read, get on the horn page. Every available surgeon, Brenda, clear bays, 1 through 4. Move, 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 mahor. The ER erupted into chaotic, uncoordinated panic. The civilian staff at Memorial West were excellent at managing highway pileups and hunting accidents. But military-grade trauma, live fire blasts, high-velocity ballistics, and tactical amputations was an entirely different beast. They were entirely unprepared for the sheer brutality of war coming through their doors. Before they could even fully clear the bays, a sound vibrated through the floorboards. It started as a low, rhythmic thumping in the distance, cutting through the howling wind and rain. Thwack, 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 thwack. It grew louder, faster, shaking the glass doors of the ambulance bay. The deafening roar of twin turbo shaft engines drowned out everything else. They're landing! Tyler Reed yelled over the noise, looking out the reinforced windows as the massive, imposing silhouette of a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter descended onto the hospital's rooftop helipad, its landing lights cutting through the heavy rain like searchlights. Let's go, Penhaligon ordered. Reed, Brenda, and 2 other nurses sprinted for the trauma elevators, riding them up to the roof. Sarah followed quietly, keeping her distance, blending into the shadows of the corridor as the elevator doors opened to the roof access. The moment the roof door swung open, the civilian team was hit by a hurricane of rotor wash freezing rain and the overpowering stench of aviation fuel and burnt cordite. The side doors of the Black Hawk were already shoved open. An Army flight medic, his uniform soaked in blood, leaped onto the rain-slicked tarmac, screaming over the deafening roar of the engines. MIST report. The medic roared, dragging a Stokes litter out of the bird with the help of a crew chief. We got an urgent surgical 24-year-old male bilateral traumatic amputations below the knee from an unexploded ordnance blast. Applied 2 CAT tourniquets at 22:40 hours. He's pushed 2 units of whole blood in flight. Lost radial pulses 3 minutes ago. Dr. Penhaligon stood frozen in the rain. The terminology, the sheer volume of blood, the horrific sight of the soldier's mangled lower extremities, it short-circuited his brain. He was used to sterile environments and neat, predictable lacerations. He stared at the tactical tourniquets biting into the soldier's thighs, completely paralyzed. "Doctor!" the medic screamed, getting in Penhaligon's face. "Are you deaf? I need an attending to sign off on the handover and get him to an OR. Penhaligon stammered, shielding his eyes from the rotor wash. "We need to get him inside. Reed, grab the IV. He doesn't need an IV. He needs a massive transfusion protocol and immediate surgical intervention," the medic yelled, realizing with dawning horror that the civilian doctor was freezing up. Another soldier was pulled from the chopper, this one thrashing violently, clutching his face. "White phosphorus burns to the upper torso and airway," the second medic yelled. "He's losing his airway. I couldn't tube him in the bird." The Memorial West team was completely overwhelmed. Tyler Reed backed away, looking like he was going to be sick. Brenda was covering her ears, shouting into her radio for security, completely useless in the clinical chaos. The soldiers were bleeding out on the roof of a civilian hospital, and the best trauma team in the state was crumbling under the pressure. Then a small, steady hand shoved past Dr. Penhaligon. It was Sarah. She wasn't wearing a jacket, just her oversized scrubs, completely indifferent to the freezing rain and the deafening noise. Her posture had completely transformed. The sedated sloth was gone. In her place was a woman radiating absolute terrifying authority. Sarah grabbed the flight medic by the tactical vest, pulling him close so he could hear her over the engines. "I'm taking lead," Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the panic like a knife. "I see your cats. I'll assess for conversion downstairs. Run the TXA." The medic's eyes went wide with relief. Finally, someone who spoke the language. "1 gram pushed 10 minutes ago. Good, keep the pressure on those stumps." "You the second bird medic?" Sarah pointed at the soldier with the burns. "Crick him right now. His airway is swelling shut. Don't wait for the bay. Grab a 10 blade and a 6-0 tube from your jump bag. Do it on the tarmac." "Copy that," the medic yelled instantly, dropping to his knees to perform the emergency cricothyroidotomy. "Jenkins, what the hell are you doing?" Penhaligon finally found his voice, stepping forward and grabbing her shoulder. "You are a temporary nurse. You cannot give orders." Sarah turned, shrugging off his hand with a violent, practiced motion. Her hazel eyes, usually so soft and tired, were blazing with a cold, hardened fury. "Shut up, Arthur." Sarah ordered, her voice dangerously low, but carrying enough command to make the arrogant surgeon physically recoil. "You are completely out of your depth, and if you get in my way right now, these men will die. Do exactly as I tell you, or get off my roof." She didn't wait for his response. She grabbed the front of the first soldier's litter. "Let's move," Sarah roared to the army medics. "Trauma Bay 1 is prepped. I want the massive transfusion cooler open the second we hit the floor. Move, move, move." As they sprinted toward the elevators, dragging the blood-soaked litters, the flight medic looked at Sarah, noticing the methodical, flawless way she handled the trauma lines while running. "Where the hell did they find you?" the medic panted, recognizing the unmistakable demeanor of a combat veteran. Sarah kept her eyes locked on the soldier's fading monitor. "Kandahar," she replied coldly. "Forward Surgical Team 7. Now keep bagging him, soldier. We aren't losing him today." The elevator descent from the helipad to the ground floor felt like an eternity suspended in absolute chaos. The metallic walls of the cramped car reverberated with the frantic, heavy rhythm of chest compressions delivered by the flight medic, Sergeant First Class Griffin. Beneath his gloved hands, the critically wounded soldier, a 24-year-old corporal named Miller, was rapidly exsanguinating. His combat uniform was saturated with darks, viscous blood that was now pooling steadily on the linoleum floor, creeping toward the corners of the cab. Dr. Arthur Penhaligon stood pressed tightly against the back panel of the elevator. His previously pristine tailored scrubs were now violently splattered with red. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and entirely hollow. The arrogant, untouchable god of Memorial West's surgical wing was actively entirely overwhelmed by acute psychological shock. The neat, predictable world of scheduled cholecystectomies and standard civilian vehicular traumas had been violently ripped away, replaced by the barbaric, unforgiving reality of a battlefield injury. Sarah Jenkins ignored the surgeon completely. She was operating on a deeply ingrained, almost cellular level of muscle memory, forged in the dusty, blood-soaked tents of Kandahar. The quiet, hesitant turtle of the emergency department had completely vanished. "Griffin, how long has he been pulseless?" Sarah demanded, her eyes fixed on the cardiac monitor that rested precariously on the patient's shins. 4 minutes. Griffin grunted, sweat pouring down his face as he pushed hard on Miller's sternum. "We lost the radial pulse right before touchdown. Tourniquets are holding the femoral arteries, but he lost too much volume in the dirt before we could secure the hot zone. He's empty," Sarah concluded rapidly, her mind running complex physiological calculations in milliseconds. "He doesn't have enough blood volume for the heart to pump. Compressions are just moving air. We need to clamp the aorta to shunt whatever blood he has left to his brain and heart. We need a reboa." The elevator doors chimed and slid open. "Clear the hall!" Sarah roared. Her voice, usually so soft that people had to lean in to hear her, now echoed down the corridor with the concussive force of a mortar shell. Brenda Carmichael, the tyrannical head nurse who had spent the last 6 weeks making Sarah's life a living hell, stood frozen outside Trauma Bay 1. She watched in stunned silence as the temp nurse effortlessly commandeered the horrific scene. Sarah grabbed the front rails of the heavy Stokes litter, hauling it out of the elevator with a startling, brutal strength, dragging it furiously toward the trauma bay. "Brenda," Sarah barked as they crashed through the swinging doors. "I need the Belmont Rapid Infuser online right now. Get the MTP cooler open. We are hanging 4 units of O-negative uncross-matched blood and 4 units of fresh frozen plasma. Spike them and run them wide open on the pressure bags." "Do it now." Brenda blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The Belmont. We don't usually use the Belmont unless—" "Do it now, Brenda, or get out of my trauma bay!" Sarah screamed, her eyes flashing with a terrifying absolute authority. Brenda flinched, the sheer force of Sarah's command shattering her usual dominance. For the first time in her 20-year career at Memorial West, Brenda scrambled to obey, her hands shaking violently as she tore into the massive transfusion cooler. Sarah turned to Tyler Reed, the terrified first-year resident who was plastered against the wall. "Reed, grab the Reboa kit from the central supply cart. Get a 7 French sheath and a wire. Move your feet." As Reed scrambled away, Sarah looked back at Penhaligon, who had finally staggered into the room. He was staring at the mangled, bloody stumps of Corporal Miller's legs, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Arthur," Sarah said, intentionally dropping his title to break through his panic. She stepped directly into his field of vision, forcing him to look at her. "Arthur, look at me." Penhaligon's terrified gaze met hers. "You are a board-certified trauma surgeon," Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming a fierce, steady anchor in the storm of the room. "I have seen your hands work. You are fast. You are precise. I need those hands right now. This boy is dying, and you are the only one in this room legally allowed to slice into his femoral artery. Do you understand me?" Penhaligon swallowed hard. I've never placed a Reboa balloon under these conditions, not on a blast victim. The tissue damage—" "I don't care about the tissue damage," Sarah cut him off ruthlessly. "I will guide your hands. I have done this in the back of a moving Humvee while taking mortar fire. We have a sterile room and excellent lighting. You can do this. Put your gloves on, doctor. Something in her unyielding confidence pierced through his paralyzing fear. Penhaligon took a deep, shuddering breath, his professional training finally clawing its way back to the surface. He nodded quickly, snapping a pair of sterile gloves over his bloody hands. Reed rushed back into the room, slapping the resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta kit onto the Mayo stand. Sarah ripped it open with practiced efficiency. Right common femoral artery. Sarah instructed stepping back just enough to give the surgeon room while maintaining absolute control of the environment. Make a vertical incision. Find the artery. We have to do this blind, no time for ultrasound. Feel for the pulse, even if it's thready. Penhaligon grasped the scalpel. His hands, which had been shaking moments before, steadied as they touched the familiar steel. He made the incision, his surgical muscle memory taking over. He dissected down through the bloody, traumatized fascia. "I have the artery," Penhaligon reported, his voice finally stabilizing. "Puncture it," Sarah ordered. "Insert the sheath. Advance the balloon to zone 1, just above the diaphragm. We need to cut off blood flow to the lower half of his body to save his heart." As Penhaligon meticulously threaded the thin catheter up through the soldier's descending aorta, Sarah turned back to the monitors. The rapid infuser was whining loudly, pumping warmed blood into the soldier's central line at lightning speed. "Balloon is in position," Penhaligon stated, sweat dripping from his brow. "Inflate the balloon," Sarah commanded. Penhaligon pushed the syringe, filling the tiny balloon inside the aorta, with saline effectively acting as an internal tourniquet. "Balloon inflated," he said, holding his breath. The room fell into a tense, agonizing silence, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical pumping of the Belmont infuser and the frantic, chaotic shouts bleeding in from Trauma Bay 2 next door. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Suddenly the flatline on the monitor blipped. Beep. It was weak, erratic, and sluggish, but it was there. The massive influx of transfused blood, combined with the clamped aorta, gave the heart just enough pressure to restart its electrical rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. The sinus rhythm began to narrow and stabilize. The blood pressure readout flashed on the screen, climbing from a lethal 40/0 to a sustainable 90/60. "We have return of spontaneous circulation," Tyler Reed whispered, staring at the monitor as if he had just witnessed a genuine, irrefutable miracle. "Don't celebrate yet," Sarah snapped, though a tiny fraction of the tension left her shoulders. "He's stabilized for transport, but his legs need massive debridement, and he's still bleeding into his pelvis. Arthur, call the main OR. Tell them you are bringing up a bilateral amputation for immediate closure and washout. Reed, you go with him." Penhaligon looked up from the table. He stared at Sarah, the woman he had relentlessly mocked just 4 hours ago. He realized with profound, crushing clarity that she had just saved his career, his sanity, and this soldier's life. "Thank you, Jenkins," Penhaligon said softly, his arrogant facade completely shattered. "My name is Sarah," she replied coldly. "Now get him upstairs before he bleeds out again." The sun was just beginning to crest over the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting a pale, cold light through the shattered rain clouds. The emergency department at Memorial West looked like a war zone. Discarded packaging, bloody gauze, and empty saline bags littered the once pristine floors of the hospital. The 2 critically wounded soldiers had miraculously survived the night and were recovering in the intensive care unit following exhaustive, grueling surgeries. The immediate crisis had passed, leaving behind a heavy, exhausted silence. Sarah stood at the sink in the staff break room, scrubbing dried blood out from under her fingernails with a harsh, bristled brush. She was exhausted down to her bones. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the 4-hour ordeal was rapidly evaporating, replaced by the familiar heavy weight of old memories she tried so desperately to keep buried. The heavy break room door swung open. Brenda stepped inside, looking utterly defeated. The head nurse clutched a cup of coffee, staring at Sarah with a mixture of awe, guilt, and profound confusion. "They are both stable," Brenda said quietly, her voice devoid of its usual venom. Dr. Penhaligon just came down from the operating room. He said the reboa placement saved that young life. He also told the hospital administrator that you directed the entire code. I do not understand. Sarah did not look up from the sink. She just kept scrubbing. It was a team effort. The flight medics did the heavy lifting. Stop it, Brenda insisted, stepping closer. Who are you, Sarah? Because agency temps do not walk into a level 2 trauma bay and run a mass casualty military triage with their eyes closed. You bypassed protocols I did not even know existed. You did not even blink once. Before Sarah could formulate a response to deflect the question, the heavy double doors of the emergency department lobby hissed open. The heavy rhythmic thud of combat boots echoed down the hallway, approaching the break room. 2 men in crisp, immaculately pressed Army combat uniforms walked into the room. The first was the flight medic, Sergeant Griffin, now cleaned up, but looking exhausted. Beside him stood a tall, imposing man with graying temples, wearing the silver eagles of a full colonel on his chest. Colonel James Harrison stepped into the break room, his sharp eyes instantly locking onto Sarah. He ignored Brenda completely. The colonel stopped snapping his boots together, and to the absolute astonishment of Brenda, he offered a sharp, crisp salute to the temporary nurse in the oversized scrubs. It has been a long time, Major Jenkins. Colonel Harrison said, his deep voice thick with emotion and immense respect. Sarah stopped scrubbing her hands. She dried them slowly on a paper towel, turning to face the officer. She did not return the salute, but she nodded deeply. Colonel Harrison, it has been 3 years, Brenda gasped, stepping backward. Major, Sergeant Griffin here told me a civilian nurse essentially hijacked my casualty drop and saved my men. Harrison said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. When he described her as a quiet woman who yelled like a drill sergeant and threw around battlefield vascular surgery commands, I had a very strong suspicion I knew exactly who it was. The ghost of Viper Company. Viper Company, Brenda whispered, her eyes darting frantically between the colonel and Sarah. Major Sarah Jenkins. Harrison explained to the utterly bewildered head nurse, turning slightly. Formerly the lead trauma nurse for the forward surgical team in Kandahar. During an offensive, her field hospital was hit by mortar fire. The attending surgeons were incapacitated. Major Jenkins alone kept 14 critically wounded soldiers alive for 11 hours under active siege, utilizing experimental vascular techniques and sheer unyielding willpower. She was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry, Harrison stated. Sarah sighed. I wanted peace, James. I wanted to fade away, punch a clock, and leave war behind. To stop holding lives in my own hands. Dr. Penhaligon stepped inside. Major Jenkins Memorial West desperately needs a director of trauma. I would consider it an honor to work under your absolute command. Sarah smiled, finally looking at the doctor. I will certainly consider it. Did this intense ER drama leave you on the edge of your seat? Real-life heroes walk among us every single day, often hiding in plain sight behind quiet smiles and oversized scrubs. If you loved this thrilling story of courage, redemption, and profound medical expertise under pressure, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more pulse-pounding stories. Drop a comment below and let us know your favorite plot twist.